I think it's just accepting people for who they are, and just embracing them, you know, and that they are enough, you know, just by being themselves. Yeah, nothing more, nothing less.
To me, inclusion is listening to all of the voices around the table, and actually making sure that there is a diversity of voices around the table. And I just want to double down on what you just said, which was inclusion is about not being separatist. So it's really important to have, it's not just a conversation tonight that we're having about women, it's a conversation that we're having about including all of the different voices in the way in which we think about business and the way in which we think about the world.
I like that, not separatists.
One of the best images that I've ever heard to sort of speak about this is that diversity is being invited to the party, right? Inclusion is actually being invited to dance. So you're not just there, but you're taking part. You're feeling welcome to come and be part of the dance. And I love this way of presenting it. I found it very true. That's what we're trying to do.
And for me, so echoing, I think, what quite a few of you have said, but inclusion for me is thinking about, you know, that individual and sort of individual ability to kind of show up as you know, who you are, and rethinking kind of who has the power to really define the agenda and, you know, set, not just kind of have a voice, but set the rules of engagement and have multiple, you know, very diverse group of people.
Excellent. And I've heard very much that if you're good with diversity but bad with inclusion, it leads to exceptional disaster.
A mess.
It's a complete mess, yeah. And that's usually what leads to a lot of turnover in many companies as well. Like, you hire a lot of diverse people, but then you don't include them, and they just leave pretty immediately.
But you know, I've been really intentional about doing that in my career because there definitely are things that women have a propensity for and have a strength around. I would say communication would be one. Although when you take that up to a senior kind of board table level, there is a style of communication that is acceptable there, which is something that is learned, it's a skill. But I would say that, like, intuitively, empathy and communication are things that women typically do better than men, certainly in technology and banking, and law. So, they're the three fields that and again, this is just, you know, the fields that I've worked in are typically and traditionally male-dominated fields, and so I've been able to, over the course of the last 25 years, be really clear on what it is that men seem to do and things that women don't do, and then the things that women do. So women also tend to be able to hold more than one thought in their mind at any one time, and I don't mean to say that as again, it's not a disparaging comment. It's around kind of, it's not necessarily an analytical skill, but it's a program management. Let's call it project management. Yep. That is definitely something that I see women being able to do, being able to take kind of large-scale concepts and break them down into sort of a strategic projects and execute. Women are also very good at executing in that context. So I would say my experience is empathy, definitely, communication, definitely, and then, you know, project management 101, the ability to organise, the ability to understand where you need to get to and then break it down into steps that need to get done. And they, to me, are like far greater skill sets than being able to talk about the data and analysis relating to one particular thing. I mean, that's useful. But if you're talking about general managers, you know, in my view, I think women make better general managers because they have those capacities. That's me.
Yeah, and that intuition you have is in fact researched, and it's true that women display more empathy, and it is linked to the roles that we've traditionally, I don't know, I mean, the roles that we've traditionally played, and so it is researched that there is more empathy and higher interpersonal skills. So that's true. Now the thing that's happening right now, and it's a very interesting question you're asking, is that when you look at, when we're hiring a CEO or an executive, a C-suite, we have a list of competencies that we're looking for, right? That's how we decide what kind of candidate we're going to be looking for. And at the moment, in most places in the world, this list in most companies does not include empathy. And some of them, it might include interpersonal skills, but I don't know the number, but not all. What it does include is assertiveness, strategic thinking, charisma, ambition. And so right now the JDs are written in, or the success profiles we call them, are written in a way that describe traditional leadership that most likely is the way that men have been behaving in the past year. Now we're seeing a shift. And the research, there's a great book that just came out by an awesome guy called Thomas Chamorro. You should look him up. He's a really interesting guy. He wrote a book, I'm sorry for the men in the room, it's a provocative title, but it says why so many incompetent men are leaders or promoted to leadership. And of course he's not, what he's arguing is that this success profile that's been around for the last 50 years, it hasn't changed, is no longer relevant. Because when you look at what companies are facing now, they need that empathy to tie people together. When you're in the face of the Great Resignation, in the face of employee engagement that's super rock bottom right now, we need to bring back human relationships, empathy, and those qualities. So right now, we know that we're going to need to bring more of that. So men can definitely develop these skills. So if they can develop them, they can.
But you say you're like, if you try, we'll give you more jobs as CEOs. But for now,
women have them already. So it's probably going to be the decade of hiring women leaders. You're right.
So just one thing, and I'm going to pass it on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research that's been done by the Harvard Graduate School over the course of 50 years. Over what the profile of leaders has looked like for the last 50 years. And they've got something called the executive tick. And they measure it across three, I'm sure you guys have heard this, but for me it's always really useful and interesting to understand it. So the first pillar is collaboration and your predisposition to collaborate. The second pillar is, achievement. So do you like achieving things? They ask those questions. Then they ask, do you like to collaborate? And then they ask, do you like to have power? So the typical executive, really, until quite recently, has had an executive tick, which means you're halfway along on achievement, so you kind of like to achieve things, don't care at all about collaboration, and really, really want to have power. So what they've done now is when they take that test across, they've realised that these people are essentially psychopaths. But have been put into positions of power for periods of time. And so what they're now twisting that and going, okay, actually, what we need to do is probably get the ones who are interested in collaborating, because then we're not going to get anything done. And it's okay if they want power, there's nothing wrong with that, but you can't be leading with wanting to dominate everybody in the room, because you won't then have consensus or drive any outcomes. But historically, that's the way that very large businesses has been run. Anyone who's watched Succession will know that. So it's an interesting conversation. Sorry, I took you on, I just couldn't help it. It was such a good anecdote.
No, it was a really good one. From my side, I think I almost want to touch on the flip side that I witness a lot, and I have experienced myself as a female leader in male-dominated environments. Is that I see a lot of women kind of having to kind of code switch, but just adapt and become that alpha. I think when my first P&L role, I was at Rocket Internet, which is a very hyper aggressive company, and was one of, I think, 4 country managers that we had for 40 countries, and it was almost this sense of okay, well, I'm just gonna copy those guys' playbook. I'm just gonna out alpha all of the alphas, and my learning my learning was that actually you're perceived in a very different way as well. All of my performance reviews was I don't know if I can say this on camera, but just not very nice. I was doing exactly what my other kind of counterparts were doing, but it was seen and perceived in a completely different way. And that for me was a turning point in my leadership of okay, how am I going to I need a different playbook because it didn't necessarily work out or yield the results I want. And I see this a lot with women at Uncommon is this like discomfort of like, well, that's getting him ahead, so maybe I can just like be like that. And at Rocket it was like we'd send caps lock emails and like stuff like, you know, like one line like, what is this? It's like an email subject and email, like very
exclamation.
Yeah, exactly.
Just an exclamation.
Just like you should all be fired and stuff like, you know, you get emails like this and then send them as well, and that's just not yeah, and so that's something I have seen evolving as well, is like, okay, how can you develop your own toolkit that will ultimately yield a better result.
I would say the best advice I could give on that in my transition, and women do it to themselves, I see it all the time, is when you begin that journey to leadership, to your point about wanting to be nice, you find yourself desperately wanting everyone to be your friend. And what I can tell you for sure is that's not the right approach to being a leader.
I learned that.
And so that I would start with that, and it doesn't mean you can't be and shouldn't be. In fact, we were talking about this. Professional integrity, generosity and kindness are things that are universal human traits. They align with everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you're treated with respect, if you're treated with integrity, it makes you feel like you want to be part of the organisation. So you start with a core value system that works for you, but also be careful not to feel like you have to be everybody's friend in that journey. You don't.
Right.
Your journey is about you building a business and doing something that, you know, is personal to you, and the people around you should respect that and want to help you build that. And I mean, Nelly, you've probably got some conversations around that. I mean, you've done it yourself. We were talking about this.
I guess we can talk about boundaries as well as matrix, right? It's like it's part of the performance.
I would also say, like, sometimes being like kind and respectful means like having those difficult conversations, making those difficult decisions. Sometimes it is firing someone. Sometimes that is the compassionate thing to do. So I think it's like they're not necessarily in contrast to each other. It's about setting people up for success. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would say also, just be yourself. Don't think of yourself as, I'm this young woman, like what should I do as a young woman? Like, no, you are you. And you're great as you are. Like, you don't have to label yourself that I'm a young woman in tech or anything like that. Just be who you are, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And you're in that role because you're competent, because of your skills, because of your achievements, not because of your gender. So why should you think about your progression from a gender lens?
Right.
Just think of like your individual. Like, we all have flaws and we all have things that we need to work on, and then focus on those, so like your personal journey. But I would say, like, don't put a label on yourself that I'm this young woman in tech.
Sure
You're
thing.
just as much a business leader as everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one last thing that I see, so I work with leaders like that all day long. The one big piece of advice is not to worry about yourself, but to worry about getting to know your team really deeply. And not surface level, yeah, I got their names and I spent half an hour having coffee with them. If I were your boss, I'd say take 18 months and just get to know people. Because once you establish deep trust and you really, really know people, I mean, their motivations, their personalities, their strengths, and all these things, leadership becomes super easy. If we don't have this information, you're completely blind as a leader, and you can make so many mistakes. So spending enormous of time connecting with people, I think will set you up for success in leadership.
Got it.
So you can start, and you always should start with the easiest way to do that, which would be to connect with every single person in this room. They're all here because they're interested in the same things. We're all here because we want to do something and make a change and make a difference. You've heard 4 different people with 4 completely different platforms here, but we're all here because we care about it. So I would say first step would be where you have an opportunity to network and connect with, and you'll find, as I said, you will be attracted to people who think in the way that you do, and make the most of those connections, build out networks and support each other.
Leona?
I make a lot of connections at bus stops with neighbors because I live in Pottstown, so there are people from all over the world. And I usually have preconceived notions about people, and I think he, minds me or doesn't like me or whatever, but he actually wants to talk to me about my dogs and why I walk them and how do I, and all of that. And so I would say, talk to someone you usually wouldn't, and find out more about that person. You'll be pleasantly surprised.
That's great. Impressive.
So I'm a long-term person, so I don't know about the 24-hour thing.
I'm struggling with friends.
But if I take the corporate lens, the world of work, and so your question was how do we remove discrimination? I think the action item would be every company should roll out a long-term a long-term program to help leaders in particular develop their self-awareness. 99% of problems happen because people don't know each other, themselves, and they don't know the impact they make on other human beings around them. If they knew, they would change their behavior. So I think that's super action plan.
Mine, I'm struggling with the 24 hours as well, but I would say, calling, it's a small practice, but I think one that can have a world of difference. In particular, I've seen the challenge with women is that, calling out everyone's strengths and showing that active appreciation. I think we can get caught up in all the things that we don't do right, or be critical of others, but actually being able to just say, often we think these things in our head, like, Alice, the way you spoke on this panel was really, really insightful, or, there's just a lot of that exists within our heads, and I think that can make a world of difference in someone's day, in their confidence, and set them on the right track.
Awesome. And another thing you can do in the next 24 hours is you can download the TigerHall app and key in the code Mandala that gives you 30 days free access. And that's where we have a lot more content and stories and experiences on this topic as well, from influencers of all genders and more from these four as well. So you can tune into that. Thank you so much, Leona, Anna, Alice, and Yolanda for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you to the Mandala Club, and thank you everyone for being here.